When I was little, I used to love going to shul. Those were some of the best naps I've ever taken. And when my eyes fluttered open, I always found my head resting on my dad's shoulder. He had his arm around me. He wrapped me in his tallis as if it was a big blanket. I played with his tallis clips and pull on the strings of his tzitzit, and he would dangle them over my head. He would gently hold my hands, running them over his cheeks to show me how smooth they were, and his beard to show me how rough it was. And more than any sermon, that was what kept me coming back to shul. There's something special about that time sitting next to your parent, feeling that intimacy and that closeness. I look back in those days and I think of love, I think of feeling cared for, and I think of feeling safe. And I want to share a story with you of a boy who grew up going to synagogue, sitting next to his dad just like I did. He lived in Jerusalem, and every Shabbat, he went with his parents to shul. When the boy was young, he did the same things I did when I was little. He sat on his father's lap. He played with his father's tallis until the day came when he was old enough to put his own over his shoulders. When he grew up, he left home, he completed his army service, and he went off into the world. And one day, he told his parents that he respects them very much, but he had made a decision. He no longer wanted to keep Shabbat the way he had done growing up, and the way his parents still did. And his parents, they understood he was an adult, and he was free to make his own choices, and so they accepted what he said. But every time he came home for Shabbat, he still went with his dad to shul. He never missed a week. He went every Friday and every Saturday. And after some months of that, his mother asked him, "Why, if Shabbat is not speaking to you at this time, do you keep going to shul with Dad?" And his answer was simple: "I don't want Dad to sit alone." That boy in the story is Hirsch Goldberg Polin. His father, John Polin, shared this story countless times as he and his wife, Rachel, became household names, working tirelessly to bring Hirsch home. When John put the story in writing in August, less than 2 weeks before Hirsch was killed, he wrote, "It has been 308 days, and now Hirsch, the son who didn't want me to sit alone, sits alone himself, held captive in Gaza." At that time, with little more than hope to go on, John and Rachel continued to do everything they could to bring him home. They wrote op-eds, they went on the news, they traveled the world, and they spoke with passion and fire at rallies. They met with presidents, prime ministers, and the Pope, and they prayed as hard as they could. But their greatest efforts were not enough to save their son. When we lose a spouse, we become a widow. When we lose our parents, we become an orphan. There's no word for what we become when we lose a child. That pain is too great to put into words. The seat next to John in shul will forever be empty, as are the holes in their hearts that can never be filled. And they are not alone. Rachel and John became the public faces of the parents of the hostages, but their pain is no greater or worse than any other parents of those people who have been held in captivity for nearly a year. There are still 101 sets of parents suffering sleepless nights, having no idea where their children are, if they are okay, if they're even alive. Each family has their own story to tell, or one that is too painful to even share. Their own living nightmares that they cannot wake up from. Each of those lives shattered beyond repair. Even for those who do survive, the pieces can never fully be put back together. There are too many empty chairs this year. In a poem written by Hirsch's mother, A Distant Memory Away, only 67 days post-October 7th, she writes about a woman who looks just like her because she has been crying too. Rachel begins her poem writing, "There's a Yiddish lullaby that says a mother will cry 1,000 tears before you grow to be a man. I have cried a million tears in the last 67 days. We all have. And I know that way over there, there's another woman who looks just like me, because we are also very similar. She has also been crying. All those tears, a sea of tears, they all taste the same. When Rachel wrote these words, she had no idea if Hirsch was alive or dead. She was completely and utterly in the dark. She knows all too well what it is like to have those red, puffy eyes, all those tears, a sea of tears shed for those children whose diapers they changed, whose first steps they cheered for, who they stood next to as they read Torah for the first time, and whose normal lives were halted in one horrific day. On October 7th, parents read text messages that read, "I love you, I'm sorry, pray for us." They never got to see the responses of their parents. Moms and dads, helpless to save their own kids. They watched in horror along with the rest of the world as their lives were changed forever, powerless to stop it, with no way to know if their children were safe. Today we read Judaism's most challenging story, the binding of Isaac. Abraham follows God and finds himself within inches of sacrificing his own son. And every year when we arrive at this day, I read the story with fresh eyes. I try to put myself in Abraham's shoes, feeling like he had no choice but to obey God's words. But since becoming a father myself, and especially with the horrors of this year, I can't empathize with Abraham anymore. My own son is all of 2 years old now. He is sweetness personified. When we tuck him into his crib at the end of each day, he won't let us leave until he's received enough hugs. When we finally close the door and leave him for the night, we can hear him on his monitor singing the ABCs, "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star," and "We Will Rock You." With every new word he learned, with every new sentence he strings together, I can feel my heart grow. At the rate he is going, I feel like it's going to burst any day. When he cries, he comes running into my arms, and I can make everything okay again. I love him so much that the very thought of him feeling scared when I am not there to comfort him makes my eyes tear and my chest feel tight. How could Abraham have cradled his son in his arms, felt the same love I feel every single day I'm with my son, and still hold a knife to his throat? As he followed God's word, each step bring him closer. What was going through Abraham's mind? Was he eager to do what God told him to do? Was he worried? Did he go reluctantly? Did he toss and turn in the night and wake up in the morning wanting to just go home? Was he angry? And if he was, why didn't he just yell at God? Where was his courage? Was he sad? Like Rachel and John, was there a hole in his heart too? Abraham took his son while Sarah slept in the early morning hours. She didn't know what was happening, and he left no note to say that he would be back soon. Did it ever cross his mind what would happen when he had to go home and tell his wife what was going on? All the while, she sat at home waiting. Did she know where her son was? If he was alive or if he was dead? How many times did she pace back and forth, biting her nails, tearing at her hair, waiting for them to come home? Thanks only to an angel who arrived at the last second to stop Abraham, Isaac survived, but the damage was beyond repair. A midrash told by the rabbis to help us understand gaps in the Torah imagines the first conversation between Isaac and his mother after this incident. Sarah asks Isaac where he had been, and her son explains, "I was taken in the early hours of the morning. I was told to climb up mountains and hills. I had no idea where I was being led, and I found myself in a place I had never been before. My father built an altar and he tied me down. He took out a knife. If not for an angel of God, I would have been killed. There was nothing I could do to protect myself, and I was so scared." And when Sarah heard all that, according to the midrash, she cried out and all at once, her soul left her body. She couldn't stand the pain. She was so overwhelmed by the feeling of not being there when her son needed her most. She was so helpless that she died right then and there. This story hits close to home for us now. Its echoes reverberate. The parents of those hostages relive this nightmare every waking moment. And I cannot imagine what it must have been like for John and Rachel to listen to this story in shul today, celebrating Rosh Hashanah for the first time with an empty seat between them, their new normal. In the Torah's narrative, Sarah is entirely absent, left at home. She plays no role in the story at all, helpless and in the dark about what is unfolding, helpless to stop it. Those hostage parents are experiencing their own feelings of helplessness, scared, having no idea where their children are. They're vulnerable. They've given up their feeling of control, sidelined, but not out of the picture. They're literally doing all they can to make their voices heard. Earlier this year, we saw images and heard stories of how parents gathered in the bitter cold and set up speaker systems on the border with Gaza. They yelled into megaphones and to microphones to send reassurances to their children in the desperate hope that they could hear them deep in those tunnels. Merav Gonen, the mother of one of the hostages, Romi Gonen, screamed until she had no voice left toward Gaza. Romi, we miss you so terribly, but we are strong. Don't lose hope. We're turning the world upside down. We're doing everything we can to bring you back. And those screams were met only with silence. In August, Romi's family celebrated her 24th birthday without her. They do not know where she is, if she is safe, if she is eaten, if she is alive. They're doing everything they can. They're begging for someone to come to their daughter's rescue, pleading with every fiber of their being. These are the things you do when you are desperate, when you don't know where to turn and you will try anything. Sarah is not in the story of Akedat Yitzchak, but many modern Israeli poets have written her back into the narrative, imagining what she would do if only she had the chance. The poets give her voice back, no longer passive or quiet, but instead desperate for her child's safety and survival, just as any parent would be. Esther Edinger, an Israeli poet and mother born in Jerusalem in 1941, gives us her version of what it must have been like for Sarah to frantically address the angels who protect their sons, petitioning them to do whatever they can to shelter and spare her Isaac. She writes, bribing angels, tempting angels, bargaining with angels, appeasing angels, flirting with angels, making a deal with angels, burning, screaming at angels, so that they may hold back the hand, invent a ram. It is a desperate appeal to the angels. I know I'm powerless. I know I'm not in control, but I am doing everything I can to save my son's life. Please, God, take the ram, but whatever you do, do not harm my child. And that is exactly what these parents have been doing too. They've been anything but silent. They've served as the voices of their silenced children, hoping, pleading, bargaining, doing everything they can, praying for that ram. Almog Sarusi was one of the 5 hostages killed alongside Hirsch on that horrible day. At his shiva in August, his father told those who had come to comfort him that he had made a deal with God. If his son was returned, he would return to religion. And when Almog's body came back with 2 bullet holes, nobody would have blamed his father for being angry, for turning his back to God, but instead, he felt as though God had maintained his end of the bargain. His son was dead, but at least he was home, no longer in pain. There was closure, no more worrying. And true to his word, this father became religious just as he had promised God. That pain is incomprehensible. But we all know what it is like to make deals with God. Who among us can say we haven't spoken to those same angels? We've all made promises to lead better lives. If only our son can just come home from the hospital soon. If that test can just come back negative. We all know what it is like to talk to God in our moment of most desperate need, to pray and beg and plead with our very hearts and souls. That is the reality of too many parents every minute of every day. When they are so desperate, where can they find some sense of solace? How can they bring back power when they feel so powerless? Who do they turn to? How much more of themselves can they sacrifice for their children to just come home, sleep in their own beds, and feel the loving embrace of their parents' arms? What more can they do? Where are the angels who will bring these children home? Who will send the ram? When Rosh was killed, when that bartering, when that pleading, when that praying and hoping was not enough, and the angels failed to deliver, a part of us all died too. Rosh's last name was Goldberg Polin, but for the last year he has felt like all of our son, our brother, our friend. We've all felt his loss and been bonded in shock and in sadness. He represented hope, and in my heart of hearts, I really believed he was coming home. In his death, we lost someone that none of us had met, but who was near and dear to us all, sacrificed on the altar of our country and of what it means to be a Zionist. And while Rosh and many of those hostages who were killed will be remembered as heroes, they're still children. Rosh's parents talked about him as a kid who was kind and caring. He grew up with a love of geography and maps. His diet consisted mostly of carbs and cheese. He was a diehard fan of his favorite soccer team, Hapoel Yerushalayim. He was the kind of kid we all know. Children represent joy and innocence and purity, the best of us. October 7th was not just a day of death and destruction in Israel. It was the death of a shared child, the loss of our collective innocence. It destroyed the sense of safety and security we once thought we lived with. It opened the door to questions that were always lurking beneath the surface and forced us to grapple with what it means to be unsafe in the world, knowing that when we open the door to each new day, anything can happen. To us, or God forbid, to our children. It shattered an image for many of us of the type of world we want our children to grow up in. As parents, the world seems to get scarier by the day. Gun violence remains the number one cause of death for children in America, and there's no end to that trend in sight. This past year, anti-Semitism has suddenly become acceptable. Will it always be safe for us to wear a kippah wherever we go? Or do we risk physical or verbal harassment just because we are Jewish? Whether we are sending our kids to elementary school with bulletproof backpacks, through metal detectors, or just to the campus of Columbia University, we can never fully turn off the parts of our brain that worry for our kids. It feels harder than ever to keep our kids sheltered from the evils of the world. And with the dangers of social media in each of our pockets, never knowing what we're going to see, how long can we keep them protected from these larger trends we feel powerless to stop? I will admit, this past year I wished on more than a few occasions to be little again, to be resting on my dad's shoulder, playing with the strings of his tallis, protected from the dangers of the world. Ironically, everything my parents did in life was to prepare me for these kinds of moments, to be a father myself. But I guess I'm still nervous and scared and shaky. The world feels scarier in ways we never could have imagined and in ways we never thought it would be. As I wake in the morning and I see the news and feel the anxiety around us as Jews, as Americans, as members of a civilized society, I can't help but shudder for what our future might look like. Every day I say that I wish I could keep my son small, protect him forever, just hide him under my tallis. But at the same time, I know I can't, and I know I shouldn't want that. He should be free to grow and explore and experience. One day you push him in the stroller, and the next you're sitting in the passenger seat of their car. In Judaism, the greatest triumphs come from the hardest times. Today is, of course, the start of the new year, and it is also when we see the new moon of Tishrei. And whenever we have a new moon, it is always when the sky is blackest. And if I've learned anything from my love of Batman, it is that the night is darkest just before the dawn. Every time we have felt like the world was ending, we woke up the next day and we started again. I have to believe we will find a way to navigate this time too. We can overcome this anxiousness about tomorrow and find a way to take the next steps. There's a teaching about why we blow the shofar in the specific order we do. Why each group of sounds begins with the uninterrupted blast of the tekiah, and then goes to the broken note of the shavarim, and ends with the fragmented sound of the truah. But each broken note is followed by a whole note. We return to the tekiah. And that is the message of Rosh Hashanah. I started off whole. I became broken. I even splintered into fragments. But I shall become whole again. I shall become whole again. May that be a message we can all take as we enter a year filled with uncertainty together. Shana Tova.